When I was reborn at the moment when Ryan Carter asked for a divorce for the second time, I didn't hesitate in the slightest. I picked up the pen and signed my name on the divorce agreement without a second thought. Ryan Carter had no idea that a year later, Carter Enterprises would suffer massive financial losses due to betrayal from the top executives at the headquarters. The corporation would fall into a crisis, and under the combined attacks from its business rivals, his mental state would worsen. In the end, it all culminated in bankruptcy. The once glorious Carter Enterprises collapsed overnight, and Ryan Carter, the heir to the corporation, became a penniless man, so broke that he had to live in a basement, surviving on instant noodles. Back then I truly loved him. I was willing to endure hardship by his side. Even if he had nothing left, as long as I could stay with him, I was happy. But what I never expected was that even after he lost everything, the only person in his heart was still his first love. Even when I was pregnant and about to give birth, he abandoned me, classified as a high-risk patient by the doctors, just so he could take care of her child. In the end, because I waited too long for his signature, both my child and I died on the operating table. And that child of his beloved first love? He only had a mild cold. Sophia, stop making a fuss. Just sign it already. What's the point of dragging on a marriage without love? Ryan's voice was calm, almost indifferent. I know you've wasted your youth on me all these years, so I won't treat you unfairly. I'll make sure you're financially secure for the rest of your life. You'll have what most people can only dream of, even if they work their whole lives. Ryan still seemed a little guilty, but as he continued, his tone gradually turned condescending, like he was doing me a favor. I was just a girl from an ordinary family, completely unworthy of someone like Ryan Carter. Back then I was hopelessly in love, never considering anything else. I never asked for anything from him. Even after we got married, I worked hard to support myself, never once touching the money he provided for my living expenses. I naively believed that by maintaining financial independence, I could preserve the purity of my love for him. But I had never once stopped to think about how Ryan truly saw me. Looking back now, it was only natural that he felt superior because Ryan Carter had never respected me. To him, I was merely a convenient distraction in his moments of loneliness. Well then, thank you, Mr. Carter, for letting someone as ordinary as me rise to wealth overnight, I said with a smile. Having lived a second life, my words carried no sarcasm, just genuine sincerity. The experience of going through Carter Enterprises' bankruptcy, of suffering alongside Ryan through those bitter days, had made me realize just how crucial money was. Only when a fool finally wakes up does she truly become clear-headed. The past had faded like smoke in the wind. Money in hand was the only thing that truly mattered. A man might betray you, but money never would. Ryan Carter was the first man I had ever loved. Back in high school, when he saved me from being bullied by upperclassmen, he seemed like a god descending from the heavens. I fell for him completely and utterly. Even though his heart belonged to another woman, the one he saw as his first love, I still loved him in silence. Then when his first love left him and went abroad, he was heartbroken. Out of spite, he married me. I didn't mind. I happily agreed to marry him. I thought that even if Ryan didn't love me, as long as I gave him my sincere devotion, one day he would be moved. For more than 8 years, over 3,000 days and nights, I cared for him, supported him, and stayed by his side. Even when he fell into despair after the bankruptcy and ruined his kidneys from drinking, I didn't hesitate to give him one of mine. Even a stone should have warmed up by now. But the moment his first love returned, freshly divorced and crying in front of him, playing the victim, he immediately forgave her without hesitation. He placed the divorce papers in front of me and firmly insisted on ending our marriage. In my previous life, when Ryan first handed me the divorce agreement, I was in complete disbelief. I refused to sign. Perhaps he knew I needed time to process everything, so he gave me some time. A month later, he brought up the divorce again. Maybe seeing how heartbroken I was made him feel a little guilty. This time, the terms of the divorce settlement were even more generous. Not only did he increase the amount of money he offered me by an additional $2 million, but he also gave me the villa in the mid-levels and 2 commercial properties, each over 3,000 square feet in the city's largest shopping district. But this time I wouldn't hesitate, because I finally understood, a man's love is fleeting, but wealth is forever. Back then, my entire world revolved around this man who never loved me. I didn't care about material possessions at all. I clung to the marriage and refused to divorce him no matter what. But Ryan Carter kept bringing it up again and again, his attitude becoming increasingly harsh each time. Until Carter Enterprises went bankrupt. When he no longer had the qualifications or ability to take care of his beloved first love, he finally stopped mentioning divorce. He couldn't bear to see her suffer hardships. Yet during the most difficult period of his life, when I was the only one standing by his side, supporting him through everything, helping him through his downfall, the moment things started looking up again, when he managed to rebuild his career, he immediately ran back to serve Shane Lee like a devoted servant. Even now, I don't know whether, at the moment he learned that both my child and I had died on the operating table, he ever felt even a shred of regret. "Sophia, don't say things just to be spiteful," Ryan said in a gentle voice. "I truly hope you'll have a good life from now on. Look at the terms in the divorce agreement. If there's anything you're not satisfied with, just say it. I'll meet all your requests." This was the first time in all the years I had been with him that he had shown such patience. And it was just to coax me into signing the divorce papers. What a joke. How blind had I been all these years? Now, living my life over again without the illusions I once had, I looked at Ryan Carter's still handsome face and felt nothing but disgust. Hearing his words, I picked up the divorce agreement and examined it carefully. Aside from the properties he was giving me, he had also agreed to pay me a $1 million annual allowance for the rest of my life. That lifted my mood a bit. But Carter Enterprises would be bankrupt by this time next year. A so-called installment payment was nothing more than an empty promise. If I couldn't get the money right now, even at a slight discount, the deal was worthless. "Sophia, what are you thinking?" Seeing how seriously I was reviewing the divorce terms, Ryan assumed I was coming up with some new scheme to stall for time. He watched me carefully and asked the question just as my expression darkened slightly. I ignored whatever nonsense he was imagining and pointed at a specific clause in the agreement. "If we're going to get divorced, let's make it clean. No lingering ties. No dragging things out. The yearly allowance? There's no need for that. Just pay me the full amount in one lump sum." Ryan froze. He hesitated, then muttered, "You're 29 now. Even if you live to be 80, that's another 51 years. I didn't wait for him to do the math. "I'll round it down for you. Just give me 50 million. Ryan's face darkened slightly. "Sophia, what?" I cut in, smiling. 50 million is nothing to a man like you, is it? If you won't give it to me, then I won't sign the divorce papers." Slapped him across the face twice. Ryan didn't even wait for my response. Without another word, he turned and rushed out the door with his secretary in tow. I clenched my jaw, grabbed the divorce papers from the table, stuffed them into my bag and stormed after him. Ryan got into the car, and just as he was about to close the door, I squeezed in at the last second. "Sophia, why are you following me?" Ryan frowned, his expression cold and distant. I crossed my arms and smirked. "I'm coming to see exactly how sick Shane's child is. If he's on his deathbed, then fine. But if this is just another one of her tricks, I'd like to see how you justify leaving me behind for this." Last lifetime, Shane had pulled the exact same stunt. She called Ryan right when I was about to give birth, crying that something urgent had happened. Her voice had been full of desperation, making it sound like a life-or-death situation. Ryan, without even thinking twice, had abandoned me, and because of that, my child and I never made it out of the hospital alive. The grief and hatred in my heart surged violently. "Sophia, I know you hate Shane, but she and her child are innocent. They haven't done anything wrong. I told you from the beginning I don't love you. The way you're targeting a child is disgraceful. If you don't want to shut up, then get out of the car right now." Ryan Carter had never been gentle with me. His attitude had always been cold and distant. Earlier, he had only softened his tone slightly out of guilt over the divorce. But now, worried about that woman's child, he had completely lost his patience. His face was dark with anger, his hostility undisguised. The hatred in my chest burned hotter, but I suppressed it. If I pushed him too far, he might really throw me out of the car. At such a critical moment in our divorce, I couldn't let him escape. Besides, Ryan and Shane, that pair of scumbags, would eventually get what they deserved. That didn't stop me from collecting some interest in advance. The rest of the drive was silent. When we arrived at the hospital, Ryan jumped out of the car and ran straight to the nurse's station, urgently asking for Shane and her son's whereabouts. Then, without hesitation, he sprinted down the hall as if a second's delay would be catastrophic. I followed behind him at a more measured pace. The moment I turned the corner and saw Shane and her son sitting perfectly fine in the waiting area, my lips curled into a sneer. The boy, Emmy, who had supposedly passed out, was sitting on a chair sniffling, his eyes wet with unshed tears. His skin had a few faint red spots, likely from a mild allergic reaction. Beside him, Shane had the same delicate, pitiful expression, her eyes glistening as she reached out to Ryan the second he appeared. "Ryan," she whimpered as she threw herself into his arms. "You scared me to death. I was so afraid. Emmy is my everything. I was terrified something would happen to him. Thank God the doctor saved him." Standing nearby, I scoffed coldly. "Anaphylactic shock? Hardly. With only a few faint rashes, this didn't even qualify as a mild reaction. There was no way he had passed out. But Ryan, that blind, brainless idiot, believed everything Shane said. Memories of my past life hit me like a storm. My child, my innocent baby, had actually been in danger. He could have been saved, but because of this vile woman, Ryan had abandoned me when I needed him most. A cold, fiery rage consumed me. My vision turned red. Without thinking, I lunged forward and slapped Shane across the face. The sharp crack of my palm against her cheek echoed through the waiting room. Shane barely had time to react before I slapped her again. Then again, my hand flying with years of pent-up hatred. Her stunned expression was almost laughable. I still wasn't satisfied. Grabbing a handful of her hair, I yanked her forward and gave her another hard slap, making sure her delicate, pitiful image was completely ruined. At that moment, I was no longer playing nice. Ryan was frozen in shock, too stunned to stop me at first. When he finally snapped out of it, his face twisted in rage. "Sophia, what the hell are you doing? Are you insane? How dare you lay a hand on Shane?" His eyes burned with fury as if he was ready to tear me apart. He yanked me away from Shane and even raised his hand about to strike me. I welcomed it. "Ladies and gentlemen, take a good look. These two scumbags are a perfect match for each other," I shouted, my voice echoing through the hospital hall. "Ryan Carter, you would actually hit your wife, your legal wife, for the woman who abandoned you years ago? Do you have no shame?" A crowd had already gathered around us, murmuring in hushed voices. I had planned ahead while sitting in the car earlier. I wasn't just staying silent. I had reached out to multiple media outlets. Ryan Carter was Carter Enterprises' heir. A scandal like this? No way the reporters would miss it. Before we even arrived at the hospital, journalists had already been stationed around the area, waiting to capture every single second of this mess. Now, camera flashes erupted like fireworks. Ryan's hand froze in midair. He wasn't an idiot, he knew what this looked like. If he actually hit me, the headlines tomorrow would be brutal. I could already picture them. Carter Enterprises heir Ryan Carter caught cheating. Wife confronts mistress in public scandal. Legal wife slaps mistress while husband protects his lover. Disgraceful scene unfolds in hospital. Ryan clenched his jaw and lowered his hand. His expression shifted instantly. "Sophia, this is all a misunderstanding. Stop making a scene. Let's go somewhere private to talk." His secretary rushed over, attempting to do damage control, but I wasn't about to let them sweep this under the rug so easily. "Go inside." "Why would I do that?" I snapped, my voice dripping with venom. "I refuse to be in the same room as that shameless homewrecker. Just breathing the same air as her is disgusting. And that little brat of hers? He's already learned how to act just like his mother. Who knows whose husband he'll seduce in the future." "Sophia, Emmy is just a child," Ryan barked, his face turning pale. I felt a surge of anger and resentment rising inside me. "Sophia, how can you say that about her?" Shane clung to Ryan's arm, her voice trembling with grievance. "I know you've misunderstood my relationship with Ryan, but we've always been innocent. He's only here because he cares about Emmy. She's just a child without a father, and Ryan couldn't bear to leave her without help." Shane, as always, played the victim to perfection. She looked at me with those pitiful, teary eyes, as if I were some villain tormenting an innocent mother and child. A few people in the crowd even showed signs of sympathy toward her. I sneered. "Spare me that act, Shane. If you're so innocent, why were you crying in my husband's arms? Ever heard of boundaries? Or do you just not believe in them? And why exactly does your daughter not have a father? That's not my fault. That's because you were out messing around while married. Your ex-husband did a paternity test and found out the child wasn't his. She's a bastard. That's why he threw you out along with your kid." Could make sure the truth resurfaced. Shane's reputation would be ruined at the perfect moment. Not now, that would be too easy. I would wait until Ryan and Shane were married, until he had given everything to her, tied himself to her completely. Then I'd deliver my wedding gift, a scandal so explosive it would destroy him. But for now I had more pressing matters to handle. The transfer of assets needed to happen immediately. The very next morning I called Ryan's secretary. Unlike Ryan, his secretary actually had a brain. He had seen how I had treated Ryan all these years and surprisingly held some sympathy for me because of that. He didn't give me a hard time. In fact, he handled the transfer of assets swiftly and efficiently. Within hours, all the properties and commercial spaces were officially in my name. As for the financial settlement, Ryan wired the entire amount in one go, million in compensation, million in installments, a total of $1 million. When I saw the final balance in my bank account, I nearly laughed out loud. Finally, now that I had the money, I moved on to my next step, investing. Days later, I poured million into a single stock. In my past life, I had once read about a stock market miracle, a casual investor who had turned a small investment into times its value in just months. I had looked up the details back then purely out of curiosity. Who would have thought I'd get the chance to use that knowledge? This was my golden opportunity. The market could crash, fortunes could be lost, but I knew exactly which stock would skyrocket, and thanks to Ryan I had the capital to invest, so I took the risk. For the next months I lived and breathed the stock market. Nothing else mattered. I didn't care about Ryan, I didn't care about Shane. I focused entirely on my investment, and when the time came I cashed out my bank account balance $1 billion. I leaned back in my chair, finally able to breathe freely. I could spend the rest of my life doing absolutely nothing and still live like royalty. It wasn't until months later that I saw Ryan and Shane's names back in the headlines, front page news. Shane had finally married him without me standing in her way. She had successfully latched onto her prize. She was now the glorious wife of Ryan Carter, a member of high society. And just as I finished reading that news, my phone rang. Ryan's mother. I smirked as I answered the call. How unexpected. Ryan's mother had never liked me. She was the one who had raised Ryan to be the arrogant important man he was today, high and mighty, looking down on everyone. During my years as Ryan's wife, she had treated me with nothing but condescension and hostility. She had never once acknowledged me as her equal, so why was she calling me now? Out of curiosity, I agreed to meet her. The location was a high-end cafe. When I arrived, she was already seated, dressed elegantly as ever, the picture of wealth and refinement. The moment she saw me walk in wearing a simple tracksuit, her expression slightly shifted. Disdain, disgust, disappointment. She scoffed. No wonder Ryan wanted to divorce you. Look at yourself, you have no class at all. In the past, every time my former mother-in-law looked down on me, her disdain had stung. It had made me feel inferior, humiliated, and deeply hurt. But now, hearing those same words, knowing what she would soon be facing, all I felt was satisfaction. Karma was finally doing its job. So is this why you called me here? I asked, arching a brow. Ryan's mother, Mrs. Shao, finally got to the point. As much as I dislike you, it's pathetic that you spent all those years by Ryan's side and still couldn't hold on to him. You actually let a shameless woman like Shane steal him away. She had never liked me as a daughter-in-law, but at least I had been a proper one in her eyes. Shane, a divorced woman with a child, was a gold digger, clearly after Ryan's wealth. But what angered her most was that Shane had managed to drive a wedge between her and Ryan that she absolutely could not tolerate. That was why she had called me here. She wanted me to fight Shane. Sophia she said, her voice softening slightly. You were always the better match for Ryan. Come back to him. I'll support you. I'll be on your side. I nearly burst out laughing. So this was her plan, to use me as a weapon against Shane. I leaned back lazily and smirked. Mrs. Shao, you're mistaken. The problem wasn't that I couldn't keep Ryan, it was that I was blind enough to want him in the first place. My tone turned mocking. A cheating man and his mistress, they deserve each other, and you always thought I wasn't cunning enough to be a good daughter-in-law. Well, now you have Shane, who's exactly the kind of scheming woman you deserve. A conniving daughter-in-law for a demanding mother-in-law. What a perfect match. For years I had endured this woman's condescension. I had swallowed my grievances, never talking back. She was used to having power over me, to me being the obedient, submissive daughter-in-law. She never expected me to say something like this. Her face turned red with rage, her hand clutching her chest. I Gave her a sweet smile. Mrs. Shao, since we were once family, let me leave you with a little parting gift. I think you'll enjoy it. With that I placed a USB drive on the table. Sophia Green, don't think you can just walk away after taking my son's money. She spat, her voice shaking with fury. You're just a second-hand woman now. Do you really think you'll find someone better than Ryan? You'll regret this. I didn't argue. Time would prove everything. I stood up, leaving the USB drive behind. Whatever storm it caused for Ryan and Shane, I couldn't care less. Just to be thorough, I sent a second copy of the USB drive to the media. Even though the Carter family was on the verge of bankruptcy, Shane still had a few months left to enjoy her so-called luxurious life, but I wasn't going to let her, not even for a second. That USB contained every dirty little secret Shane had. The night after I sent it, I booked the first flight out of S-City. I had more than enough money now. The world was mine to explore. For the next few months I traveled freely, staying far away from the Carter fame's impending downfall, but I still kept an eye on the news. Sure enough, Ryan and Shane were a mess. Entertainment tabloids splashed their scandals across the front pages. Ryan and Shane getting into a heated fight during a high society event with rumors of an impending divorce. The headlines hinted at infidelity, money issues, and family feuds. Meanwhile, Ryan's mother openly complained to the press about how disappointed she was in Shane, how she regretted letting Ryan marry her. It was all falling apart. I returned to S-City right before the Carter family's bankruptcy. Stepping off the private jet in stilettos, I was greeted by a line of handsome tall men carrying my bags, offering me water, feeding me fruit. Money was truly a wonderful thing. With enough of it, I could have any kind of man I wanted. Gentle, attentive, eager to please. You've really fallen this low, Sophia. Familiar voice rang out behind me. I turned, mildly surprised. Ryan Carter. I hadn't expected to run into him here of all places. He looked exhausted. His once pristine appearance was gone. His face was haggard, his eyes sunken. He looked like he had aged years since I had last seen him. His voice was filled with pain. You really can't live without me. How is that? Why you're doing this to yourself? Before I could even process the absurdity of his words, the handsome man beside me reached out and gently patted my back. Did that scare you? He murmured, his voice soothing. Whoever just yelled so rudely must have no manners at all. Ryan's expression darkened instantly. Seeing me pampered like this by another man was clearly driving him insane.